Hmm.
If I take my critical lens off though, and I just become like a Transformers nerd, like if I just transform myself into being my 7 year
Right.
old self again,
Yeah.
I loved this movie. Like
Yeah.
as a fan,
Yeah.
I think the movie does a great job. And like Michael Bay, like they didn't hire Paramount did not hire Michael Bay to show reverence to Transformers. They hired
Hmm.
him to make shit look cool, as you talked about,
Hmm.
and to blow things up and get people in the seats in that regard. And so he wasn't as concerned with cameos. He wasn't concerned with Easter eggs and showing reverence to the legacy of Transformers. This film is. This film cares about that and I think does a great job with it. So as a fan of Transformers, as someone who grew up with it and was obsessed with it as a kid, I felt like a 7 year old again in the theater. And that's probably the biggest praise I could give it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I was thinking after I got out of that theater, I said, you know what? If I had kids, like if I had like, boys that were like, you know, 8 to 14, 15, like this is the movie I'm taking them to see.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm thinking if I was that age, that would be the movie that I wanted to see. Like, I felt that way watching the movie, and I'm thinking, like,
Hmm.
you know, like the second act, it kind of, I said the movie kind of got in its own way. We got to find the thing to get the thing to find the thing. And like, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like, just the movie is kind of getting in its own way. It's kind of like, if I had an analogy, it's like the car is running smoothly, and then in the second act, it got like wooden ovals for tires, just dun, 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 dun. It's like, oh, we're kind of getting there. And
Yeah.
then at the end, like I just got into the action, I got into
Yeah.
like the emotion of the character, even though it's hitting you over the head with it. Like that's some really Roland Emmerich stuff. Like, I'm your brother, I love
Oh, yeah.
you, and
Yeah.
we're
It's not
brothers.
subtle. It's
No,
not subtle. No.
and I'm thinking, this is definitely for normies, just like, oh wow, it's so emotional because they're brothers, and I have a brother too. I connect with this movie, but I'm like, yeah, but who cares? Like, I'm totally in for it, and that's the
Yeah.
thing too. Like, I think when a movie, um, when you're able to kind of dismiss the problems, even though you know that they're there, but when you say, who cares? Then you just
Hmm.
go for it. Like if I was in real cynical brain mode, I said this in my review. The song "Hypnotize" by Biggie Smalls is in the movie,
Yeah.
and the movie takes place in '94. That song
Hmm.
wouldn't have come out yet, but it's like,
Hmm.
who cares? Like that song's good,
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
I do know people, and I'm sure that you guys get this too. Like in your comment section, like, oh, the movie sucks because of the, like, they'll try to find every single thing wrong. It's like, well,
Yeah.
then you make a better movie then.
Yeah.
um yeah, so but that's the thing, right? Like the overall experience of the movie, I thought the heart was in the right place. It wasn't
Yeah. I
oozing of
agree.
cynicism. It was that you could tell that there was a story that they were trying to tell here about, brotherhood. And like you said with Optimus Prime, it seems like he's like the Optimus Prime before the Optimus Prime that we know
Yeah.
from the
He's
cartoons.
learning.
He's
Yeah.
learning about it. And I think, yeah, we all have to learn to become the people who we want to be. And
Yeah.
the kind of the duality there between him and Noah Diaz, I thought was
Mhm.
actually like, oh, you know what? I see you, movie. I see you
Yeah.
trying some bigger themes. Good job.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it wasn't like some Christopher Nolan level, deep, complex character study. But it's
No.
not just like, no sacrifice, no victory.
Yeah.
It wasn't as on the nose as that. So yeah, I thought that it had a good balance. And I agree with you there though that the Michael Bay Transformers did have more of a unique look to them than
Mhm.
like you said, like the CGI soup. But I did like how simple it felt. The
Yeah.
action scenes did feel very simple, even though the end battle did kind of feel like end game because they're fighting on like some like dirt, kind of gray crater looking place.
Yeah.
And I was even thinking like that. It's like, okay, this is the end game of Transformers because it's in the same place.
Yeah.
Y'all got to get to that one thing in the middle. Um, but yeah, like it was a fun movie. And I want to ask, without spoiling it, what do you think of the after credit scene or the pre-credit scene? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't love it, but I'm willing to also hold and reserve judgment until I see what comes of it because I don't. we've seen this happen before with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, for example, where
That's a good
something
point.
is teased and then nothing comes to fruition. And I
Hmm.
don't know if this is going to make enough money. I hope that I'm wrong, but I
Right.
don't know if it's going to make enough money to warrant
Yeah.
another franchise that they're trying to establish here. But we live in a world where IP reigns supreme, and
Yeah.
they're gonna go for it. And it felt really out of place. Like if they would have left it, I guess, as the end credits little tease, a la, we're going after the Avengers Initiative, like that kind of thing.
Right.
Then I would have
Gotcha.
been okay. I would have been less kind of eye rolly with it, I think, but
Right.
it's before the credits, so it's technically part of the movie as it kind of wraps
Yeah.
up, and I don't
Yeah.
know.
I see your point there. But I would say though that like the Amazing Spider-Man 2, like that's not a movie. That is a that's a commercial. It's a Spider-Man commercial for the Sinister Six, for Black Cat, for Doc Ock, for all these other villains to come. And man, oh man. But anyways, I will say though, with that end credit scene though, I had no idea they were going that direction. I
I
was like,
didn't either. It
whoa,
was like I
okay.
was
Yeah.
anticipating like Sector 7. That would make
Yeah, that's what I
sense.
thought too. 100%. I'm
But
like, oh, it's John Turturro's gonna walk right in, but
yeah,
no, they didn't do
exactly.
that.
That's what I was waiting for. Yeah. And it was a sleight of hand. I certainly give the film credit for that. And I mean, if this film does well and they're able to pull off a franchise a la what the MCU has done, look, I'll come back to this and I won't think much of it. Right. It's just right now, I don't know if it's necessary. But you do make a good point, although I will slightly defend The Amazing Spider Man 2 for reasons we don't have to get into here, I guess.
Yeah,
But this film does function within its own cylinder until
yeah,
that moment. That's the only time it kind of gets out of bounds where
yeah,
this is self contained. And I do
yeah,
appreciate that. I do appreciate that because, yes, films like The Amazing Spider Man 2 or much of what we've seen with DC over the last 10 years, they have struggled mightily to have, and even Marvel, to have these self contained stories.
yeah.
And this is mostly self contained. So it's not, the comparison isn't quite apples to apples. I do think you make a good point there.
And I like that you said self-contained because people have asked me, going like, "Oh, Brandon, like, do I have to watch Bumblebee? Do I have to watch Last Night? Do I got to watch all these things?" And I go,
Yeah.
"Actually, no. You can watch just this." And I I have this argument with people all the time, and I'm shocked to know that I'm in the minority with this, but I'll beat this drum until I die. If you have to do prior research before watching a movie, the movie fundamentally flaws. The
Yeah.
movie fundamentally is flawed and falls on its face because a movie should give you all the relevant information to tell the story it's going to tell. Yes, you
Hmm.
will understand it more. Like if you watch A New Hope, you'll understand An Empire Strikes Back more, or The Empire Strikes Back, I should say.
Hmm.
But you can watch The Empire Strikes Back and understand what's going on. Like they introduce Luke Skywalker, they introduce Princess Leia,
Hmm.
they introduce whatever. Yeah, in this movie, there's one line of dialogue that ties it to Bumblebee.
That's it.
That's
100.
it.
Yep.
So,
Hmm.
I've been told by people like, well, this Star Wars movie makes sense only if you watch the eight seasons of Clone Wars, and you got to read this comic book, and then it makes sense. It's like, why the hell would I do that?
Yeah.
So it's like, just forget it. So,
Yeah.
and that's the thing with Marvel now too, where it's getting into that category where it's like, well, in order to understand movie X, you have to watch TV show A, TV show
Hmm.
B, and know movies C, C,
Yeah.
D, E, and F. And I'm not a big fan of that. Sure, you can reference things, and yes, it can be a sequel, but really, a great movie, I think, is self-contained enough that you can understand the core story. And
Hmm.
I think Transformers: Rise of the Beasts does that because you can go into this without seeing like a single Transformers movie and understand the core story. Does that make sense?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And continuity can be tricky because when it's utilized properly, we get some of the best films in the genre, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you when you talk about, Empire Strikes Back, or for me, The Force Awakens, I love how that film subverts the mythology of the original series. Or
Hmm.
more recently, you think about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3,
Yeah.
which is a little bit of a balancing act of being a self-contained story. It
Hmm.
doesn't rely on a larger MCU ethos,
Hmm.
but the emotion of that film is felt when you know
Yeah.
what had happened in the previous two Guardians films and in
Yeah.
some of the Avengers
Yeah.
movies. So it
It's
isn't
enhanced.
yes,
Yeah.
like that film and its true potency at 100%, it's the
Hmm.
most effective when you've already experienced those other movies. But that's the
Hmm.
thing with continuity. Like when it utilizes it well and it tells a good story and it's self-contained enough that you don't have to watch like 100 movies,
Yeah.
then yeah, I like when franchises can, build upon itself to make the next movie better.
Yeah.
But as we've seen, there are a lot of movies that do it poorly,
Yeah.
and then it just becomes tiring. And I think the MCU is somewhat fumbling that at the moment. I think that's where some
Hmm.
people are getting
Yeah.
tired. But movies like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and even what we've seen with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, how that
Hmm.
has its own identity, but the way it also taps into its predecessor is pretty
Yeah.
seamless and borderline brilliant. And
Yeah.
and so I there is certainly hope that with good writing and good directing, these franchises can certainly elevate themselves as they go. And Transformers Rises of the Beast isn't trying to be anything other than what it is. And I do appreciate that. You made a great
Yeah.
point earlier about how it's not trying to sink below a certain threshold. And yes, if you were to talk about the direction, the writing, the performances, everything still is around a B in terms of quality. And the film does care about those things, but it's also not trying to be Citizen Kane either. Like
Yeah.
it knows that it has to fill the middle with fluff so we can get from the
Mhm.
beginnings of New York to whatever Zion we're in the third
Mhm.
act. I don't even know where we are in terms of geography.
Yeah.
And it's all done prosaically. It's, visually whatever, but there's still a lot of fun because of how the film builds to that point in terms of character and
Yeah.
even its themes as, unsubtle as they are. I still think the performers give credence to them with Peter Cullen and how he taps into Optimus Prime as, yes, a leader of the Autobots, and they certainly revere him, but he's a flawed leader in this film, which I appreciate, and how that rubs up against Noah. Like there's conflict there that the film does a great job of maneuvering through. So when we get to those final moments at the end, regardless of what it looks like visually, at that point I don't care. I'm
Mhm.
emotionally invested because of the storytelling here, which is refreshing from Michael Bay because he never cared about story, and and the
Yeah.
performers here, and the performances of the Bayformers are also a little uneven. So, excuse me, are a little uneven, but I think the performances all around here are pretty good, borderline great at times. So yeah, all of that to me makes for an effective film. So yeah, I can put on my critical lens and see where the film is kind of swinging that pendulum,
Yeah.
but it also taps into Transformers nerdum in ways that
Mhm.
is great. And I don't want to get into spoilers, I guess, so it's hard to reveal the specifics of them. But there were more than a few times where, as a nerd of this franchise, I was geeking out pretty
Mhm.
hard, and I had a great time because of that.